husband is a painter. Well, that's a stretch. He does very modern Jackson Pollock style art. I've seen him in the studio, and he's not so much painting as he is flinging paint at the canvas with his bare hands. Strangely, though, people pay real money for his work. His most recent one, gray and blue splatters on a gray canvas entitled Ocean Dawn, fetched us a cool $3,000. He makes a full salary off his work, and then some. I don't get it. Maybe the people who buy his work are smarter or more cultured than me. They all fit a very specific type: well-dressed men with distinguished salt and pepper hair, petite blonde wives that look like they've never eaten a slice of cake in their lives. Money to burn, put on the dog types. Although, if it's a choice between one of my husband's paintings and a Louis Vuitton purse, well, his paintings are marginally less ugly than those purses. Man, what is it with rich people and ugly stuff? Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent here. The reason why I'm writing this is because my husband has been away for the past 2 weeks visiting family. While he's been gone, I've been running the business by myself, and I've noticed some odd things. His studio is a really nice space downtown, large and full of light, filled ceiling to floor with his paintings. And even though they're individually ugly, there's something sort of beautiful about them being all together. The different colors and splattering types all match and coordinate with each other. It's obvious they're all done by the same artist. Maybe that's why he makes money off them. They have a distinct style. You can point to one and say, with certainty, that's a Theodore Waters painting. The thick globs of paint, the colors that don't really go with each other, that's a Waters right there. I could put on a smock and throw paint at a canvas while listening to Gregorian chants too, but I wouldn't be able to produce paintings that consistently resembled each other in style. The first few days went well. We had a minor hiccup. I almost gave the woman buying Evening Tranquility the wrong painting. They looked identical to me, but I was enjoying it. After work, I'd head to the studio for a few hours and binge dramas on Hulu, waiting for the next client to come by. Things took a turn for the worse, however, on Wednesday night. My iPad ran out of battery 20 minutes before the last client was supposed to show up. So I just sat there, staring at the paintings. I got up and rearranged them a little. I pulled out the piece that was supposed to be sold tonight, Midnight Dream. It was one of the less ugly ones, if only for its color scheme. Black canvas, or possibly navy blue, splattered with purple, mauve, indigo, and white, and just a few dots of ocean blue, drizzling across the front. I leaned it against the other paintings and sat back at the desk, taking off my glasses and rubbing my eyes. Damn allergies. When I looked back up, however, I froze. With my glasses off, Midnight Dream was now blurry. And with all the random splatters blurred now, I could see a clear shape. How there were less splatters, more darkness, in the center of the canvas. That looked exactly like the silhouette of a person. A person leaned over the viewer, staring down at them. What the? I put my glasses back on. But with all the clear dots and drizzles and specks, I could only barely make out the image. Was that why people were buying Theodore's paintings? Because there was a second hidden image. It didn't make sense, though. I'd seen Theodore making some of these paintings. He was randomly flinging paint on a canvas, listening to those calming Gregorian chants or whatever they were. There was no way he could plan where the paint fell to create a second image, unless he was somehow going back and painting over some of the paint splatters later, though I didn't see any brush strokes to imply that. I got up and pulled out another one of Theodore's paintings, entitled Pink Marble Splatters of Pink and Red and White. I leaned it against Midnight Dream, stepped back, and took off my glasses. It was a hand covered in splatters of blood. My stomach did a little flip. I felt nauseous. It's just art, I told myself. People do extreme art all the time. What about that one where that giant guy is eating a man? That's like in an art museum and everything, right? Nothing wrong with painting a bloody hand. Nothing wrong with painting a shadow person glaring down at you. And maybe I was wrong. There wasn't much detail in these images, just the suggestion of forms. It could be pareidolia, my brain assigning familiar shapes to the paintings. Like a Rorschach test. Maybe these were random blobs, and it was just my imagination. I took out another painting. This one was pretty ugly. Muddy shades of brown and green around the edges. A big pink blob in the middle. Spring Blooms was the title. I leaned it against pink marble and stepped back. Closed my eyes, let out a breath. Took off my glasses. I opened my eyes. Oh no. The pinkish blob, now blurred and at a distance, was clearly the shape of a woman's body. Laying on the ground, splattered with blood. Why would he paint this? And who would buy this? Who would want a painting of a dead body in their home? I swallowed, my throat dry. I put on my glasses and slid the painting back in with the others stacked up. Was this the reason Theodore was actually making money? He was selling these paintings to sickos that were camouflaged well enough to stay hung up through dinner parties and visits from the in-laws. I texted the client who was supposed to pick up Midnight Dream and told them I wasn't feeling well. Then I drove home, stomach twisting, and locked myself inside. But I didn't exactly feel safe in the house either, because Theodore had a few of his own paintings hanging on our walls. I realized now, as I viewed them from a distance, that the painting in our living room depicted a close-up of a woman's face, but something black was oozing out of her mouth. Vomit? A spider? Not enough detail to tell. And the huge one in our bedroom, hanging above our bed, looked like two lovers embracing, except they appeared dead from the ashen gray tint of their bodies. This was sick, and it didn't even make sense. I remembered when Theodore painted this one, the one of the lovers. I had watched him for more than an hour. He was just flinging paint randomly as he listened to the weird chanting music he always played. Yet the blobby shapes clearly suggested two people embracing. I decided to sleep in the guest room that night. But before I did, I made the mistake of walking into Theodore's home studio. I'd left the lights on somehow, so I stepped into the studio, my heart pounding. It was a lot more cramped than the one downtown, only about 100 square feet, with a huge stack of paintings in the corner. As I reached for the light switch, I noticed the unfinished piece on the easel. I'd seen it several times over the last few weeks, but now I saw it differently. I took off my glasses and took a few steps back, out into the darkened foyer. It was a woman, lying on a dark wooden floor, splattered in blood. Except that woman was me. Of course, I couldn't be sure. There wasn't enough detail. But from the colors that looked like my favorite gray sweater, my hair splayed out on the floor. I backed away. Then I ran out of the house. I drove all night until I got to a friend's place. That's where I am now. Theodore has tried to call me, but I've let all his calls go to voicemail. Every time I close my eyes, I see the painting. The splatters of paint that look just like my dead body. Story 2. I escaped a cult that silenced women. Physically, literally. The women in that cult had their vocal cords cut with a special ceremony when they were 12. We lived in a remote community up in northern BC. It was known as a healthy, thriving community with orchards and mines, electricity, and a small clinic, and even a tattoo parlor. The teachers and doctors had internet. It was beautiful and very peaceful. Everybody was well looked after, with plenty of wonderful food and an outdoorsy lifestyle. In fact, I later learned that outsiders often make applications to join the community, women even with their children. Sometimes the applications were successful. Not me, though. I had been desperate to get out ever since the day I was 10, and my dad told me about the silencing. Dad was a teacher. I had wanted to become a teacher like my dad. I had grown up watching him prepare lesson plans, grade assignments with his thick, chunky red pens, discussing course content and pedagogy with his colleagues loudly and passionately. I was enthralled by it all and knew, as indeed my dad often said, there was nothing more noble and worthwhile than teaching and shaping the mind of the young. No wonder only men in our community were entrusted to be teachers. How ridiculous and backwards was the outside world with their female teachers and unsilenced women always mired in instability and chaos. No wonder the outside was full of war, violence, debt, and poverty. Their women always under the threat of assault. The teachers played us videos with current dates, clips from the news made by outsiders themselves, showing how they treat their women. No wonder there was always a queue of women desperate to join us, a community free of mistreatment, abuse, and assault, with plenty food for everyone and a small safe home. Being silenced must be a small price to pay. I remembered my mom laughing until the tears ran down her face when I had first told her about wanting to become like teacher, just like Daddy. Then she had gathered me in her arms and sobbed as if her heart had broken. Dad told about the silencing a short while after that. He was a great teacher, and I understood why it was necessary. Dad had explained it all carefully, the history, the benefits to community, the evolution from a symbolic tattoo along the throat to an actual, painless clinical procedure which disabled the vocal cords permanently. I was so lucky I had a teacher dad who took the time to explain things so beautifully and clearly to me. Other girls would usually just get a notice from the clinic with the date and time of their silencing appointment. However, as Dad said, it was very important that it was taught correctly, with proper context. Otherwise, it wouldn't be understood properly. That's why teaching was such an important job. Having a teacher dad had other benefits too. He had thrown me a silencing party most girls could only dream of, with amazing food imported from outside, dancing and singing. I had a gorgeous fluffy, glittery, lacy dress, also bought specially from outside for the occasion, and all my friends had been so jealous as I shimmered through the day. I still remember that dress. But then it was over, and everyone went home. My silencing would take place tomorrow. I lay in the dark, unable to ignore the knot of fear that had been tightening in me all day all my life really, since the day Dad told me about the silencing. As I lay there, thinking about the procedure tomorrow, which would permanently disable my vocal cords and silence me forever, the waves of fear breaking over me grew stronger. There was a light tap at my bedroom door. I raised my head and called softly, yes. The door opened and my mom glided quietly in. She was also dressed for bed, and despite the dark, the tattoo along her neck and throat was plainly visible. She had just chosen a plain line, as I would. Many silenced women choose elaborate designs for the neck tattoo they received after their silencing, but I wanted the same plain line across my neck as Mom had. She reached out for my hand. I whispered, "Mom, I'm scared." She started typing on her pad, which was always with her. "Please don't be scared, Eliza. It's over so soon. And it doesn't hurt one bit, just the tattoo afterwards, a little bit." I read the glowing words. Then I said, "Mom, I don't want to. I don't want to lose my voice." She looked so sad as she typed furiously. "Eliza, your dad has explained why it's like this here. You've studied examples of societies which don't have silencing. You know how terrible and miserable they are. We are such a peaceful, orderly society since we started silencing women. You know that. Dad yelled loudly, Louise, are you coming to bed? Mom bent down for one last hurried kiss, and then left my room. I was alone with my fears again. I couldn't help thinking about the outside, where women jabbered, chattered, gossiped, wheedled, manipulated men, and told stories and yammered and protested and wanted this and that and the other. Dad said it was a disgrace, and one day maybe they would see the error of their ways and become like our community. But all these thoughts couldn't stop my fear for tomorrow and my silencing. Dark hours passed as I stared at the ceiling. I still remember those hours, heavy like glue, silent. It must have been 2 a.m. when I heard a faint tap-tap at my window. I sat up, putting aside my childish fears, and opened the curtain. An adult woman was behind the glass, smiling at me. Her neck tattoo was clearly visible in the moonlight, a beautiful design of roses and thorns. I didn't care about safety. My dread for tomorrow had desensitized me. I threw open the window. Who are you? The woman opened her mouth and spoke, quietly, but still spoke, her voice coming from her lips. Hello, Eliza. Will you come away with me? I had never seen a woman of that age, with a neck tattoo, who could talk. My jaw dropped. Well, she started speaking rapidly. Eliza, I know how you feel. We can take you away outside. I can't explain much now, but if you want to, you have to come away with me now. It will be a hard life, but you won't lose your voice, at least. Not today, you won't. I was silent for a bit. I felt the dreadful fear of the last few years shifting a bit, giving way to a new emotion, hope. Excitement. I looked at the aged face of this talking woman with the tattooed roses on her throat, and nodded dumbly. She smiled at me. Excellent. Follow me. No, you don't need anything. We have everything you will need. A car is waiting. Not even shoes. Just move fast, my heart beating fast. I followed my new friend and climbed out of the window. She drove me for hours through the mountains, through winding back roads I never knew existed. She told me how my mom had sent them a forbidden message to come get me. I knew I would never see my mom and dad again. Sometimes little bits of news filter through connections. The community thrives. Life outside is hard, but I can speak. Story 3. My grandfather was a survivor of a horrendous medical experiment at Auschwitz. My grandfather sat in his rocking chair, holding his body rigid like that of a corpse. His eyes looked like those of an old dog. His lips constantly chattered, and his fingers trembled with the Parkinson's that was eating him away like a cancer. We both knew he didn't have long left. He looked at me with his strange yellow eyes and gave a weak grin. Elias, I think I should tell you the story of my childhood, my grandfather said, a single tear rolling down his cheek. I will tell you of what happened to me when I was only 13 years old, when I was sent to Auschwitz with my father by my side. This is the story he told me, unbelievable as it is. Though my grandfather has been dead for years now, his story still stays with me to this day as an unbearable burden on my heart. I still remember the moment we arrived at the camp like it was yesterday. We were exhausted and starving. We had been on the cold cattle cars for 5 days and 5 nights, and we were given no food or water that entire time. Many of the sick and old died on the way. We moved their corpses to the corner of the car, and my father said Kaddish over their corpses. It was the first time I saw the light of life extinguished from the eyes of so many in so short a time, but it would be far from the last. Finally, long after the night had come, the doors to our cattle cars slid open. Pale, starving creatures in striped black and white rags stood around SS soldiers in black, spotless uniforms. They grinned as the Death's head insignia and sharp lightning bolt runes gleamed bright silver. The SS men all had vicious German shepherds who lunged at the frightened prisoners, gnashing and snapping at the air. I saw more than a few people get bit by the vicious dogs. They had deep bite wounds and chunks torn out of their flesh, and we all learned to avoid the dogs and the SS men as much as possible after that. In the dark night, we were formed into lines. Old women held the hands of their small grandchildren, and sons tried to stay with their fathers. We moved forward. Up ahead, I saw a man in a black SS uniform whistling a tune from Wagner. I would later realize that this man was Dr. Mengele. I tried to stay with my father, but the surging crowds pulled us apart. I didn't know it at that moment, but I would never see my father again. If I had known, would I have acted differently? Would I have told him how much I loved him? I'll never know, but his ashes rose up into the air later that night, and I saw it from the freezing barracks in that place of shadows. Someone behind me whispered in my ear, "Boy, how old are you?" 13, I said, turning to look at the strange figure, a starving man in a striped uniform. The man shook his head. "No, you're 16. When you get up there, remember that. You're not 13, you're 16, the man insisted. He was part of the prison commando that helped the SS with translating the many languages that streamed into the camp, and also helped them organize the prisoners for slave labor or death. I would never see that starving man again, but I followed his advice. As I got up to Dr. Mengele, he stopped whistling for just a couple seconds. The black, cloudless sky hung heavy above us, the clouds of smoke rising up from the crematoria with the smell of burning hair and searing flesh. Dr. Mengele gave me a fatherly smile, but in his eyes there was something as cold as frozen steel hiding just under the surface. I could see it, I could feel it in the air, I could almost smell it radiating off of his skin. It sent ice water racing through my veins. "Hello, son," he said in a warm voice as he gave a faint smile, though his eyes didn't smile, and as I think back on it, neither did his mouth. "What's your age?" 16, I said confidently, looking him straight in the eye. "Any physical deformities? Any illness?" He asked, the faint half-smile like a statue of Buddha, still plastered across his lips. I shook my head. "No, sir," I said. He nodded and pointed to the right. I didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. I saw, to my growing horror, that most of the prisoners were going to the left, including all the elderly, all the children, anyone with disabilities, and anyone who looked too frail or emaciated. In all, about 90% of the line went to the left, and about 10% went to the right. Those who went to the left wouldn't live out the hour. They would be stripped naked, beaten and bludgeoned to force as many people into the gas chamber as possible. Then the heavy metal door would be sealed. The Zyklon B pellets would be dropped into a vat of sulfuric acid, and the vents would turn on, whirring like hornets, breathing their deadly poison into the concrete tomb. The screams in the chamber often went on for over 20 minutes. The corpses would be intertwined in pyramids, their arms and legs caught together like rats in a rat king. The cyanide gas prevented their lips and fingernails from turning blue, and made the corpses look pink, almost healthy except for their frozen, terrified death masks and sightless eyes. In 1944, while I was at Auschwitz-Birkenau, I was coming back late from a work detail in the nearby concrete factory with some other inmates. We passed through the freezing winds and whipping snow that bit like an ice pick into our bodies. There were open-air pits that belched black smoke into the air constantly. What a world we lived in, where the graveyards rose into the sky and the blackness of space descended on those below. That was the night when my faith in God finally died forever. As I would learn later, the SS had a recent shortage of Zyklin B, the cyanide pellets used to exterminate masses of human beings and turn them into ashes and fetid, reeking smoke. The advances of the Red Army had caused issues with delivering it, and a transport of children had just come into the camp. The SS men and the capos loaded these children, most of whom were no older than 7 or 8, onto the beds of 2 dump trucks, beating them with truncheons and kicking and punching them. When the crying, bloody children were finally all settled in on the back of the dump trucks, they had drivers back them up towards the inferno of burning bodies. I watched, horrified, as they slowly angled the beds downwards. The children began sliding out with horrible, wretched screams. They fell into the pit of fire. I watched their hair burn, their skin blacken and sizzle, the drops of fat melt and drip off their shrieking lips. Some of them tried to crawl out, but the black-clad SS men went around with long sticks and pushed the half-dead, writhing children back into the scorching flames. My grandson, I tell you truthfully that this is what I saw with my own eyes, heard with my own ears, when I was only 13 years old. The screams of the burning children went on for 15 or 20 minutes. It felt like, at that moment, we stood in the center of the universe. God had died. He had murdered eternity and left us alone in this endless pit of suffering and death. There was no justice I knew, and if God was real at all, then he was either evil or insane. The faraway stars of cold white light seemed to turn and look down on us, all of us, the living and the dead alike. The wind whipped past us, screaming with the voices of the damned. Sometimes, late at night, I think I still hear those children screaming as their bodies burned and blackened. Is it any wonder, then, that I almost never sleep, and when I do, I wake up shrieking as mountains of pale, burning corpses flash across my mind? One day, during selection, I saw Dr. Mengele again. He looked me up and down and wrote something on a clipboard. Later that day, I was told by the capo that I would be moved to the medical ward. The medical ward? I asked, confused. Why? I'm not sick. The doctor requests your presence, the capo said sarcastically, giving me a little bow. He was a fat man with a face like a bulldog and red hands like a butcher. He loved to beat and rob the prisoners under him. Move, scum. Double time. Get your ass to the medical barracks. I didn't need to be told twice. I quickly scurried away, constantly glancing back to make sure no blows from his fat hands would rain down on my head. I wound my way through the bare, wooden barracks that acted as our homes, the homes for walking skeletons of men whose bodies were frozen and dying. Within these barracks, we were often packed so tightly together on the hard, wooden planks that one man couldn't turn around in the night without every other man in the row having to move. But when the freezing winter cold blew in, and we only had thin blankets and our black and white striped rags, the body heat from the others kept us from freezing to death at least some of the time. Corpses were taken out of the barracks every morning, prisoners who died from the cold, from hunger, from dysentery or disease, from beatings and murders and suicides. It was like a constant stream of death, a waterfall of oblivion crashing forward. The corpses came, but the fire ate them all greedily and exhaled only fetid black smoke in response. I walked into the medical barracks, sat on a chair, waiting. I saw my friend from the work, Commando Moshe. His dark, serious eyes stared through me, as if he didn't see me. He had a straight nose and high cheekbones on his aristocratic face, though he now looked as pale and starved as I did myself, no more than a bag of bones wrapped in skin and clad in rags. Eliezer, Moshe said, suddenly realizing I was there. Were you chosen for this too? I nodded grimly, not knowing what he was referring to, but feeling in my heart it was nothing good. Nothing good ever came from this camp after all. Nothing but reeking smoke and ashes came from it. Nothing but the hurricane of souls whipped away in the currents of the Zyklon B came from it. Do you know why we are here? I asked, fidgeting and nervous. I glanced around, seeing a clean, well-stocked medical room beyond with a surgical table in the middle. There were bunks in the back of the medical barracks where the lucky ones would live. We even got increased rations of sawdust bread and watery soup. Dr. Mengele wants us, Moshe said simply, and his eyes looked through me again. His mind seemed to drift off, far away from this world of suffering. My emaciated body was such a heavy thing. It felt like the weight of the entire universe was contained within that body. I despised that body, that starving, sickly thing that followed me like a shadow. I wanted to be free of it, to see the highest reality without a body, to see truth without this constant suffering and agony, the constant hunger and cold and beatings and the stench of death. But it wasn't to be. Dr. Mengele walked into the barracks a few minutes later, surrounded by female nurses clad in white. He looked at me and Moshe. His cold blue eyes sparkled with intelligence. He always kept his black SS uniform perfectly cleaned and ironed. It gave an impression that some black knight from a lost tale of the Dark Ages had just wandered in. He held a clipboard in his hand. He glanced down at it, frowning. Then he spoke in clipped German. A 9971 and a 8991. You are hereby required to participate in a medical experiment that will test the effects of certain drugs on the body. We do this under the authority of the Greater German Reich and our Reichsführer, SS Himmler. You will stay here in the medical barracks until the experiment has ended, Dr. Mengele said. As soon as he was done, he walked briskly over to the dark room with the surgical table. He came back out with 2 syringes filled with some black fluid that shone with glittering rainbows. He came up to me first. A 9971. Your arm, Dr. Mengele demanded. I stretched out my arm. He applied a tourniquet. When the vein throbbed like a fat worm, he plunged the needle inside and pressed down on the plunger. I felt something like lava ripping its way through my body as my breath caught in my throat. I thought I was choking and dying. My heart beat so fast in my chest that I feared it must explode. Dr. Mengele walked over to Moshe as my vision turned white. I groaned, my teeth chattering, and then I fell forward onto the wooden floor. I must have lost consciousness, because when I awoke, it was night in the medical barracks. I found myself laying on a bunk. A small serving of sawdust bread and thin, watery soup was laid down next to me. Still sleeping, I saw the form of Moshe, his face as pale as a skull. Moshe, I whispered, trying to push myself to my feet. My head throbbed. I looked down at my arm, seeing a spreading patch of blackened necrotic tissue spreading from the injection site. It almost looked like shiny scales were spreading across my skin. I looked down at Moshe's arm and saw the same dark patches there. Wake up, Moshe, please. I need you. I need someone. I can't do this alone, but in my heart, I knew that we were all born alone and we all died alone. Moshe couldn't help me with anything. Even God couldn't help me here. He didn't listen to our prayers or hear the Kaddish read for the dead. He had turned his face away from us, and every dying heart, there felt that great emptiness as the life was extinguished from their eyes. I shook Moshe gently, not wanting to scare him. His eyes flew open. He looked up at me, and I saw with horror that something was wrong. His eyes had become slitted and yellow, like the eyes of a serpent. He hissed at me. A thin stream of frothy blood bubbled from his throat as he gurgled, pushing himself up like a zombie. What's happened to you? I asked in panic, backpedaling away from the transformed Moshe. He looked like a rabid animal, his eyes gleaming with insanity. He came at me, and his teeth looked longer, sharper, more predatory. They looked like fangs. He leapt off the bunk, soaring through the air towards me. As he gnashed his teeth, I frantically tried to push him away. His jaw snapped together with a crack like a bullwhip. He lunged forward, and his bleached white face came down. I felt the skin on my face tear with a pain like fire spreading through my head. He bit down on my cheek and ripped upwards, leaving a mutilated flap of skin hanging there. I felt something hot and poisonous coursing through my bloodstream, but unlike Moshe, I had not gone insane. I felt my teeth lengthening, though, and my eyes abruptly adjusted to the dark. I could see every mote of dust floating through the air, see every spatter of my blood on the swept wooden floors. A hiss tore its way out of my throat. My arm lunged forward, as if with a mind of its own. Sharp claws ripped their way out of the ends of my fingers as I threw Moshe off of me. He ran out into the night, hissing and wailing, his forked tongue flicking out between his bloody lips. A few moments later, I heard SS men yelling at the nearby perimeter, and then guns started firing. The banshee wail from Moshe grew louder, and the SS men screamed, their voices filled with panic and terror. I staggered out of the medical barracks, seeing Moshe clawing and biting at the black-clad form of an SS man. Two others lay dead next to him, their throats torn out, the mutilated flesh sliced wide open. Moshe leapt off of the dying SS man and leapt towards the electrified fence. In horror and astonishment, I watched him swipe at it with his claws. It gave a loud pop of electricity, and I saw a flash of blue light, but the black scales that now covered almost all of Moshe's skin only seemed to glow brighter, gleaming like obsidian. Moshe remained unaffected. He ripped a hole in the fence as it continued sizzling, leapt over the razor wire, and disappeared into the dark forests of Poland beyond. After a long moment staring at the bodies of the SS men, I ran forwards toward freedom as well, following the trail of Moshe. I still had my mind, however. Whatever poison Dr. Mengele had given us hadn't affected me like it had affected Moshe. But still, I noticed I was healing faster. The deep gash on my cheek stopped bleeding within minutes, and a layer of thin, black scales started to cover the wound. Over the next few weeks, I made my way to Switzerland, where I spent the rest of the war. But I heard rumors in the forests of Poland that there was a strange creature attacking isolated farms and houses. A creature with slitted eyes like a serpent's and black scales covering his deformed, twisted body. My grandfather stopped speaking suddenly, looking up at me with glazed eyes. "Do you believe it, Elias?" he asked. "Do you believe what I've told you?" I nodded. He pulled up his sleeves, and there, on his arms, I saw black scales covering his skin all the way to the wrists. Story 3. My aunt went missing 3 years ago. Last week, she sent these emails. 3 years ago, my Aunt Charlotte and cousin Sonia went to their family campsite at disused gold claim property called Camp Arnold for a long weekend. They didn't return from their trip. Search and rescue volunteers located their backpacks and lots of tracks, but no bodies were ever recovered. It gets weirder. My cousin received these emails last week. They appear to be from his mom, detailing the days before she disappeared. He started reading them, then sent them to me because he was worried they would ruin his memories of her. We can't figure out why the emails just now appeared. His mom's phone and tablet were not recovered with the rest of her gear. He wants me to tell him the sanitized version of what she wrote. He wants to know if anything in the emails explains why they vanished. I don't think I'm going to be able to tell him the truth, if that's even what this is. I'm removing the dates and specifics from the emails so they can't be identified from news articles. Names have obviously been changed. Thursday Sam We made it to Camp Arnold. Sonia got carsick on the drive out and still felt rotten through the hike to the cabin. She went straight inside to set up her sleeping mat as we made it just before dusk. We didn't bother with anything more than granola bars for dinner, although I did get the wood stove going and we had enough water left for tea. Copper was a little anxious, but he settled down once the stove had warmed everything up. The weather was wonderful for our hike. The wildflowers have quadrupled since I was here in April. You and Jimmy did a fantastic job finishing up the cabin. I was very glad to see we have a roof and a door now. Please let the girls know I saw the painted stones they left to mark the last fork in the trail. Beautiful. We could use a few more in the garden. I brought some bamboo to help outline the new beds, and I'm sure the compost from all the clearing we did last year will be good enough by now. Planning to work on the garden through the weekend and then head back to town on Tuesday morning for Emerson's baseball game. Sonia brought a map of the original gold claim on this property and is convinced she's going to locate the entrance to a mine. I bet it's all collapsed by now, if they ever even broke ground. I remember, way back when Dad bought the property, he searched for it too, but never found anything. The cell service has been worse than usual, but actually, that's part of the charm for me. I know if your dad could be here, he'd be out on the rocks with his easel first thing tomorrow, painting the view into the canyon and getting a sunburn on his neck. I feel him with me everywhere, but especially here. None of us ever really leave this earth, do we? Mom. Friday. Hi, Sam. I am dog-tired, but I got two very cute little garden beds dug out on the south side of the cabin. The soil is uneven. Some areas are too hard to do more than scratch away at, and others are much easier to dig into. Occasionally, there's an obstruction, stones and buried wood, I guess, and most of these I leave because the garden doesn't need to be dug deep. I planted zinnias and sunflowers right in front. The birds will like the sunflowers. Although it's so dry out here, it's unlikely any of it will survive long enough to bloom. Sonia made eggs and noodles on the wood stove today, and we had a good feast for lunch. Good thing, too, because Copper was a little crazy all afternoon. She hiked him as far as she could to try to wear him out, but as soon as they got back in the cabin, he was poking at the door to be let out again while she was bone-weary and ravenous. Maybe he mistakes the wind in the sagebrush for the sound of Dad hiking back for dinner. Maybe he just prefers camping in a tent. I, on the other hand, much prefer my cot in the cabin to the cold, hard ground. The only modern convenience I'm missing at the moment is light. I can't figure out where I put my flashlight, and we got in so late yesterday, we didn't bother stringing up the solar lights and then forgot about them. So now I'm already in bed, writing emails I can't send instead of what I'd really like to do, which is check out these old coins I found when I was digging the garden beds today. There are 3 of them. They look like they could be silver, but they don't have faces on them, just words and shapes that look sort of like birds. Crudely carved birds, I guess. I couldn't read the lettering on them, and then after dinner, by the time I remembered them in my pocket and was ready to see them up close with clean hands and my glasses on, it had gotten too dark. I'll send you a picture in the morning. They remind me of the big silver dollars you and Dad used to hunt for. They might have been here since the 1850s, when the claim was first active. Maybe they're even worth something. All my love to you and the girls, Mom. Saturday, Sam. It's around noon, and I'm stuck inside. We're having a terrible dust storm. It almost makes me wish we had windows, but I secured the curtain flaps down, and the Velcro is doing a good job so far. The sound the wind makes whistling through the flaps is very unnerving. It's like a person moaning. Maybe that's why Copper was so on edge. Maybe he could hear the air passing through this place all along. And I'm on edge now too, I guess. Sonia is out there with Copper somewhere. She had her sun hat and her walking poles and said she was going down to the base of the cliff to find the entrance to the mine. I was in the garden, not paying so much attention, and she mentioned she was looking all around for her flashlight. I said she couldn't have mine because I couldn't find it either. And she said, "Isn't that odd?" But I had just found more of those funny coins just an inch or two under the soil. I have a whole handful of them now. They're heavy and bright and really very beautiful. And I'd brought the coins inside and stacked them on the table before I really registered what she'd said. I looked up and there she was well away down the trail already, walking toward the canyon path with Copper at her heels. And yes, of course, she was right. It is all very odd. It's not just the flashlights. I had a bunch of paracord I'd used to tie up the bamboo that I packed in for the garden. I looped it up and hung it from one of the front rafters, and now it's disappeared. Sonia asked me what I did with her beef jerky. She had a big bag of it, she said, left on the shelf by the front door since her hike yesterday. We both shrugged it off and blamed Copper, but there would have been a torn-up package to find if he'd eaten it. Neither of us admitted that we knew it wasn't him, and I think I may have found a bone buried back near the new garden beds. Maybe an old animal bone, maybe not. I suppose I'd rather not be certain. But I keep finding coins, and the coins seem to be leading me back toward the bone, if that makes any sense. Of course, it doesn't. But there's a bad feeling hovering around all of it, a feeling that I don't want Sonia to know what could be there, and a feeling that Copper knows already. He avoids the garden now, and he barks at the wind. It's odd to think our family has been camping here for so many years, but there might be more to the place than we knew, right beneath the surface. Sunday Sam, I would say sorry for worrying you, but I see none of my messages have managed to send yet. I just see that little sending wheel that spins and spins. I should send Sonia to the top of the hill with my tablet later to see if we can get some updates from the real world. She was holed up in a cave by the base of the canyon with Copper while they waited for the windstorm to die down yesterday. I let my mind run away with itself a little, I guess. She did too, she said. She said she saw footprints in the loose dust down at the base of the canyon's strange ones, as if made by a dress shoe squared heel and pointed toe. She didn't know what to make of it, but they seemed to be leading toward the part of the canyon where she'd been wanting to go, cleft in the rocks where they slopped to a low point, where there was rubble and maybe an opening. Then the wind kicked up, and she ran back toward the path and the alcove where she sheltered. I can hear the curiosity in her voice still, but there's apprehension too. It gets eerie in remote places like this. You come across bones or a mark in the dust and your mind makes up stories. Sonia has always been tough, but sometimes I forget that all three of you kids are grown up now. I look at her and see my little 3-year-old with skin knees and hair bows, chasing after big brothers that never wanted to slow down for her. We had tuna salad for dinner and a little glass of wine. I can't believe Sonia will be 30 next year. I can't believe my only daughter lives all the way in California. It's harder accepting the big transitions when it's your youngest. Today, Sonia said she'll stay close to the cabin and help me in the garden. Only 2 nights left before we head back to civilization. There's something big I'm hoping to have her help me clear away an old dried-up root. I told her, but I've suspected for a while now that it must be another bone. It adds up the coins, the soft and hard places in the soil. I think my garden overlaps with someone's burial place. If I'm right, I'd like to move what I can of the remains into a proper grave well back in the sagebrush, where it's nicely marked, but also out of sight. I got an early start with my trowel, moving dirt, digging toward the root-like object. It was long and hard, and eventually I uncovered the end of it, where it rounded off, becoming unmistakably a femur. And as I excavated around it, I found more, cracked and desiccated pieces of a pelvis, a smashed piece of brass a buckle, part of a tool, and coins, more coins than before, not just the odd silver ones, but now identifiable ones, 2 pennies and half-dollars, and some misshapen pieces of raw gold. "Mom, what the hell?" Sonia yelled from the cabin's back door. Her voice was unusually high and shrill. I shrugged, guessing that the extra time I'd had in proximity to the bones made the horror of their discovery easier to bear. I wasn't horrified, but I was sorry. I hadn't intended to disturb anyone with my silly garden project, and I also didn't feel great about having taken coins from a burial place. I scooped up all the coins I displaced with this last dig and put them in my hat, standing up with it in my hands like a ball, looking down at the partly exposed skeleton. I realized I didn't have the energy or time to exhume the rest of him, dig a new grave, and move him. I'd have to cover him back up right here, mark the grave, maybe move the garden to the other side of the cabin. At the cabin's back door, Sonia started sobbing. "Sonia, honey, he's been dead for a very long time," I said. "How long have you known that was there?" I considered. I found those coins, and I did wonder. I think I didn't let myself really consider it. Penny and Olivia are going to play here. I know, I sighed. We'll have to move him when Sam and Jimmy are here. It will be easier if we have one of the ATVs. I swirled the coins in my hat. They were so beautiful in the afternoon, light brighter and shinier than anything fresh out of the ground had any right to be. Sonia was on the back step, hugging herself, talking about the gold claim and the 2 brothers who had originally owned the mine, how she'd tried to trace their families, but ended up at dead ends, as if they had both disappeared. "I don't want to sleep here," she said. "I want to hike out right now," I shrugged. There was nothing more I could accomplish in the garden, and I agreed that now even I was too upset to enjoy the afternoon. "Okay," I said. But the moment we stepped into the cabin, something was off. My eyes took a bit to adjust to the shadows, but there was movement. The window shades were bulging with the breeze, and the front door was clacking like someone had just exited that way. And Copper was barking crazily toward that door, but also cowering by my legs with every bark, ears tense like he was straining to locate something. I felt it too, my back prickling with the sense of wrongness. Sonia was frozen next to me, but I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. "What's missing?" "The hatchet," she whispered. And sure enough, the hatchet we had kept beside the wood stove for cutting up kindling was gone. I walked further into the cabin, wanting to look unflappable for Sonia's sake. If there was someone nearby slowly pilfering our stuff, and if that person was interested in things that could be used as weapons, we weren't going to stick around any longer than we needed to. I noted that the stack of silver coins in the middle of the table was completely untouched. I also noted with relief that my car keys were zipped inside my backpack right where I'd left them. Moving quickly, we gathered our clothes and all of the leftover food. Utensils and garden tools we would leave. We had planned to lock them up in the footlocker by the cabin's back door, but we decided not to take the time. Sonia filled our water bottles. I got Copper's bowl and leash ready, but he wasn't beside me anymore. "Copper," I called. Sonia looked at me with wide eyes. I thrust open the cabin's front door in time to see Copper racing toward the canyon trail, barking madly as he went. "What is he doing?" Sonia asked. Panic was rising in her voice. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel myself starting to shake. There were footprints in the dust all around the front of the cabin, even up to the front window, impressions left by pointed toes, as if someone had crept to the window and looked in. And the axe was gone from the chopping block that stood near the rain barrel. Flashlights, rope, jerky, hatchet, axe. Was someone collecting what they needed, or depriving us of the means to survive? I yelled for Copper again and again, but he didn't come. Monday Sam, I love you. Tell your brother that I love him too, that I was thinking of you both today. Someone will come to look for us, but let it be the sheriff, not you. I don't want you or your girls to come anywhere near Camp Arnold or the mine. It's cursed. Sonia and I agreed it didn't make sense to go after copper. It was early afternoon already, and we'd be stretching the available daylight hiking back to the car, even if we started right away. I can't explain why, but I packed the coins, so many heavy handfuls of them filling our empty peanut butter jar. We strapped on our packs and walked away from the cabin, not looking back. But when we got out to the trail and saw Copper's paw prints in the dust, we turned to follow them down into the canyon without a word. Sonia was ahead of me, setting a fast pace. Maybe she thought we could make it get Copper and still hike all the way out before dark. I made plans with every step we took deeper into the canyon, thinking maybe we could drag Copper back to the cabin for a sleepless, stressful night, then rush out when the sun rose. I could hear her saying something, but the wind had picked up in gusts, and she was several steps ahead of me. She was looking at the ground, her steps uncertain. There are no paw prints, she said, and now that I'd caught up with her, I saw that it was true. Copper's rounded prints were nowhere to be found on the sandy, stony ground, and as we turned to look up the path, the wind shot through the carved pathway, bringing a ripple of dust with it to further obscure the trail. I yelled against the wind for him, squinting my eyes in the sun and dust, and then there he is. I spotted him several yards down the trail, just a flash of curly red coat and whipping tail, as he darted onward and was hidden by the outcrop the trail hugged. There was no question then that we'd continue on to get him, though there were still no prints to follow, except occasionally for the strange angular ones, the pointed toe and hard-looking heel from whoever Copper was after. He isn't barking at all, Sonia said, yelling even though the wind had died down some. If he were chasing someone he would be barking, wouldn't he? As we rounded the next bend in the trail, I was disappointed not to see Copper. The trail of footprints had become regular and even. Whoever made them hadn't been running. Sonia pointed out cracks and crevices to our right, the sandstone alcove where she and Copper had hidden from the storm, and others. There's a whole network of them, like lava tubes, she commented, but I was thinking of our deceased friend up in the garden and his cache of coins, of all the dangers he would have faced trying to mine for metals in a place like this. Nothing of value was ever reported to have been found in this canyon, but maybe he did discover something and could never get knowledge of it out of this place. There's always a catch with treasure. Finally, we reached the bottom of the trail, where Copper stood looking up at us and wagging his tail, the same way he does at the door when asking to be let outside. I was furious, ready to rush toward him and grab him by the collar, but Sonia stopped me by clutching the back of my shirt. "That's the entrance to the mine," she said darkly, and now I saw Copper was standing right at the opening to a shadowy shaft leading God knows where underground. And there was someone inside with our flashlights and our rope, someone calling our dog to him, luring us under. "No, Copper," I told him, whistling him to me. "Come now. We're going home." My stomach twisted as I heard an echo of my own whistle come from somewhere deep underground. The sound was louder and slower than the one I'd made, almost mocking. My blood ran cold. Copper's ears perked up, and he instantly sprang forward into the mine and out of sight. Sonia and I yelled for him, crouching near the mine's entrance. The blackness inside was nearly complete, but there was the faintest reddish glow emanating from deep within. Beside me, I could hear Sonia reasoning aloud that all she had to do was get a grip on him, get the leash on him, and then she could carry him back out to the trail, and we'd all make it to the car. Meanwhile, I was having similar thoughts about Sonia. "No," I said, simply shaking my head, my eyes darting from the mine entrance to the trail and back. I was sure we weren't alone. certain to my core that we were running out of time and choices. "There is someone in there, Sonia," I whispered. She was straining to see inside the mine, holding her phone at arm's length with the flashlight on, but it was no use. The shaft was dark and cluttered with loose stones, steep and mostly featureless. There was a burst of sound from within, a clatter of what sounded like metal tools, a sliding sound of shifting rocks, and a high yip and whine from Copper, as if he'd been trodden on or kicked. This was too much for Sonia, and before I could protest, she had shed her pack and crouched her way into the mine shaft, calling Copper's name and shuffling forward until the winking light from her cell phone vanished. "It opens up," she yelled, her voice echoing up to me. "There's all kinds of stuff, old axes and wood and burlap sacks." Her voice grew fainter. "There's a pit. It's deep." She made a disgusted sound. "There are bones at the bottom. Someone died here. I don't see Copper. There are other shafts branching off, just like we saw from the trail. Come back." I yelled. "We'll get help. Copper will last a few days." When she spoke again, her voice had lost all urgency. It was quieter, so the wind almost stole it. "There's something here. It's beautiful. Sonia, come back." I yelled, and at last I was letting myself panic. Alone in the gusting dust, in the rising heat of the day, surrounded on all sides by the canyon's echoing walls. Even with the blue sky stretching endlessly above, I've never felt so trapped. I'm calmer now. It's been 2 hours. 2 hours of dead silence from within the mine. I've tried yelling, whistling, throwing stones, but there's been no answer. Only stillness. I dragged our packs closer to the trail to ensure they'll be found. I put a note in the front pocket with our names and who to contact, but hopefully someone will find these messages. It's too much to explain. I'm going in with only the light from my phone and one of Sonia's hiking poles. And the coins. My pockets are so full of coins they jingle as I walk. I can't leave them behind. I wish I knew why. Please forgive me for squandering this last chance to return home to you. I can't leave her here. Tuesday, Sam. I shuffled and scraped my way down the mine shaft, seeing at last what Sonia had seen: paw prints and dust, old tools, a path through the rubble that gave way to a gaping pit on the left side. I looked down with my phone. There were bones at the bottom inside shrunken brown clothes, scraps of a person left by lizards and rats and whatever else might forage here. It occurred to me that this was the other brother, the brother of the man buried in my garden. I knew somehow that the coins in my pocket were his. He'd killed his brother over whatever treasure they'd found, then paid back his half of the claim into the earth to make up for his guilt. And maybe I had entered the bargain by unearthing that money. Perhaps I'd sold the betrayed brother back his claim, and our flashlights and rope too. Perhaps he'd bought back his life and was free to return to his mine at last. Perhaps. We find bones and tell stories. I might be making meaning where there isn't any. I unloaded my pockets into the pit, scattering the bones with what I decided was guilty money. Take it back, I thought, so your brother can rest and leave us in peace. As the last coins fell, their silvery clatter was answered by a distant sound, the tone of metal on dense stone, a hammer strike. I was afraid at first, then hopeful, then resigned. The sound repeated, becoming a regular beat that echoed across the rocks whose long shadows shuddered in time with my steps. There was no question in my mind that the sound rang out for me. I needed to follow the sound deeper into the mine. I was sure it would lead me to Sonia and Copper, to whatever evil thing was keeping them underground. I walked deeper, half blind in the dark. Tunnels opened up before me, a labyrinth of twists and turns. I didn't see whatever Sonia had called beautiful, and soon there were no signs of mining, no tools or scraps or marked stones. I was focused on the sound, the repeated clanging that grew louder and louder. It dimly occurred to me that I was ascending, my calves complaining as I hiked for what felt like hours. The cavern walls around me lightened, glittering dimly in the light my phone cast. Sandstone. I touched a wall and felt the smooth warmth of it, then rounded a tight corner and felt my heart freeze. There was daylight ahead, the warm glow of early evening, and the sound of metal striking stone stopped. I walked out into the light, crestfallen and furious. I screamed Sonia's name back into the cave I'd come from. I was back at the top of the canyon, just across the trail from the sagebrush meadow where our cabin stands. I was near enough to see the cabin, the stump in front, and the woodpile. The axe was catching the light where it stuck up from the stump, fixed back in place, as if taunting me. I approached the cabin, cursing my decision to leave our packs down in the canyon. My phone was nearly dead. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had to know what else had returned. Maybe Sonia? Copper? The sun was getting low, and the solar lights began to blink on. The hatchet was back by the wood stove, the rope and jerky back in their places. Our flashlights were sitting neatly on the table, as if they'd always been there. I took both flashlights with me back down the canyon trail. Sonia's footprints were in the dust still, and mine. I couldn't make out any of the angular footprints, and part of me wondered if there ever had been any. Had the flashlights and the rope and the hatchet been in the cabin all along? Had I truly found coins in the shallow dirt of my garden? A feverish hope rose in me that I would find Sonia and Copper waiting for me in the canyon, ready to lead me home by the hand, bewildered at my ramblings. Remember how Dad was at the end, when he couldn't remember any of our faces. Except for Sonia. He never forgot his little girl. Our packs sat where I'd left them. I plugged my phone into my power bank and stupidly checked the tablet for a signal again. When there was nothing left to check, I squinted through my flashlight beam toward the dreaded mine opening. I had to go back in. Sonia was still in there. Again, I ducked into the mine shaft, grateful for the brighter light cast by the flashlights. The emptiness of the mine struck me. It was easier to see the walls of the entrance now, the small piles of tailings and the crags around the pit. This time, my light caught a glimmer I had missed before, a shining vein of dark gold that looked almost like a bleeding wound in the wall, starting above the pit and then leading down into it, an unbroken line of precious metal. It was beautiful, and I let my flashlight beam follow the river of gold down the wall and into the pit, understanding how such wealth might turn brother against brother, driving them to ruin. The beam of light stopped at the bottom of the pit, pooling there for a long time before I understood what I was seeing. I couldn't see the bones and shrunken brown rags that should be there. Instead, I saw Sonia, body broken, head dashed against the stony wall, a dark lake of blood pooling around her head. Copper was with her, his body halfway hidden under hers, utterly still. The coins I threw shimmered facelessly up at me, catching the light. I noted that they lay on top of Sonia's body. One rested neatly on her bloodied hairline, glimmering like a jewel. There were no hammer sounds now to call me away. The night is cold and unspeakably still as I write this. The mine was owed a debt, and it has been paid. That's the story I tell myself. But I don't understand it, so how can I expect you to understand? Don't come for us, Sam. It's over.